Lost Caverns of Ixalan has just come out, and with it have come quite a few cards that are enabling some new strategies to take into Standard. So here are my picks for what I'm personally excited to build decks around. So let's go take a look. Okay, so first up on my list of things I'm excited to put into my decks or build decks around is this little guy right here. This is Kutzil's Flanker. For 2 and a white mana, you get a 3/1 Cat Warrior. And its abilities are Flash, and when Kutzil's Flanker enters the battlefield, choose one. Either put a +1/+1 counter on Kutzil's Flanker for each creature that left the battlefield under your control this turn. You gain 2 life and scry 2, or exile target player's graveyard. Now, why I'm excited for this card is because this card single-handedly gives you a great way to capitalize on an opponent tapping out to clear your board. So like you're playing like a mono white or or Boros or any other kind of like aggressive strategy that relies on flooding the board with a bunch of dudes, and your opponent's only answer to that is by clearing the board. Well, if you keep 3 mana open when your opponent goes to board wipe, then you can drop this after the board wipe resolves and still have a giant creature to smash in for the last few points of life that your opponent will have. And what I like most about this is that this part of the ability factors in exile effects. So it doesn't say when a creature dies, it says when creatures that left your battlefield under your control. So like if your opponent uses something like a mass bounce spell or a mass exile spell like Sunfall, it doesn't matter how the creature left the battlefield, just so long as the creature left the battlefield, Kutzil's Flankers are going to care about that. So if you got like 5 guys on the board and your opponent goes to board wipe you, well then suddenly you have an 8/6 Kutzil's Flanker ready to beat in on the next turn, and that's enough to finish the game out right there. And aggressive strategies have really needed a good way to counteract a massive exile effect or a massive bounce effect or massive like board wipe effect, and Kutzil's Flanker really shines in that first ability. But another good thing is the fact that this card doesn't have to 100% be a reactionary card. It can be proactive as well. So if you need to scry to take a look at the next couple cards in your library, as well as getting a 3/1 creature on the board at the end of your opponent's turn, you can help smooth out your next draws and get some additional power onto the board to push damage on your next turn. And then, of course, there's the exile target player's graveyard, which is going to be fantastic against graveyard-centric strategies, which I think are going to be very prevalent in this next standard realm. Because like you see all of these decks that have already existed that are wanting to reanimate things from the graveyard, but now with Delve and with like Fathomless Depths and things like that, those new strategies that rely on the graveyard coming in with Lost Caverns of Ixalan can get directly countered with Kutzil's Flanker. So Kutzil's Flanker, I think, is a fantastic card. I would probably recommend seeing maybe 2 in the main board and probably 1 or 2 more in the sideboard for hosing specific strategies. Or if you are a strictly aggressive build, like you're playing mono white or Boros, something like that, you might even probably get away with maybe running 3 of these in the main board. This card is an absolute house against board wipes, and I'm very excited to see it. It reminds me a lot of an old card called Second Sunrise. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, Second Sunrise, it was a colorless and 2 white to basically counter a Wrath effect. It would put back onto the battlefield every creature that left the battlefield that turn. So it's very reminiscent of that style of effect. But of course, this one is one-sided, so it only affects your side of the board. So very, very happy to see Kutzil's Flanker. So Yeah, that's my thoughts on that. I personally want to build a Boros deck with this, and we'll probably see that in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for something with that. So, moving on. Okay, next up in our list of cards that I'm excited to play with is Unstable Glyph Bridge. So for this one, it is a 3 colorless and 2 white artifact. It reads, when Unstable Glyph Bridge enters the battlefield, if you cast it, for each player, choose a creature with power 2 or less that player controls, then destroy all creatures, except creatures chosen this way. And it has Craft with Artifact, meaning you pay the mana, and then you exile another artifact, either an artifact you control in play or in your graveyard. And it crafts into this thing called Sand Swirl Wanderglyph. It is a 5/3 flying golem artifact creature. It says whenever an opponent casts a spell during their turn, they can't attack you or planeswalkers you control this turn. And it also says each opponent who attacked you or a planeswalker you control this turn can't cast spells. So, first up, the obvious correlation here is this thing kind of runs the same ability as the Wandering Emperor. Is it the Wandering Emperor or is it the Eternal Wanderer? I think it's the Eternal Wanderer. The ability that basically you choose a creature on both sides of the board and blow the rest of them up. Except the difference here is instead of each player sacrificing the creature, with this one, it's a destroy effect. So it won't get around like indestructibles or things like that. Also, a thing to consider is you have to choose creatures that have a power 2 or less. So if neither side has a 2 or less creature, then a creature isn't chosen and the entire board is just blown up. So that's pretty awesome right there. But the other side is what I'm really interested in. Because like we have so many board wipes in Standard right now that adding another one into the mix isn't really that exciting, but the backside of the Unstable Glyph Bridge is what is very exciting to me, is the creature that it becomes. Not only is it a beefy body, not only does it have flying, but it just has this ability of basically saying, either you get to attack me this turn, or you get to cast spells, but you can't do both. And I find that infinitely interesting to play with, build around, that kind of things. Like I can definitely see this being played in like your standard Esper control or blue-white control kind of shell. But like this board wipe in particular just happens to bring along with it a very interesting win condition built onto the back side of it. So much like how Sunfall comes in with an artifact creature on the backside during the aftermath of the spell resolving, this one kind of does the same thing but in like a different capacity, and I find that very interesting. And again, having an ability that limits what your opponent can do by it just being on the table is really fascinating to me, and I can't wait to get my hands on this card and play it in Standard. So let's move on. Okay, up next is Malcolm the Alluring Scoundrel. So at first glance, this card doesn't seem all that crazy. I mean, it's just a 2/1 with flash and flying for 2 mana. We've seen this kind of like, we'll call it schematic before, like with was it Fairy Mastermind is probably the most recent card like this to come out. But where I think this card really shines is in its bulk text right here. Like this next paragraph is really what makes this card. It says, whenever Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel deals combat damage to a player, put a chorus counter on it. Draw a card, then discard a card. If there are 4 or more chorus counters on Malcolm, you may cast the discarded card without paying its mana cost. Now, that paragraph right there, that would take up to 4 turns to come online. But But I don't think I want to spend that much time over the course of a game building up counters, because like 4 turns, probably at the very earliest, like turn 6, getting that ability online, it doesn't seem that great, right? But here's where I kind of want to build this around, is I want to put this in either a like an Esper or a blue-black proliferate deck, because it's the ability is adding chorus counters onto itself. So if we strike once and get that first hit in, so like on like turn 3 or whatever, and then start applying proliferate effects and get that counter knocked up to at least like 4 to where it wants to be to get the max benefit from its drawing effect. I think we can probably get this rolling by around like turn 5, because like blue and black has a lot of really good proliferate effects that are on like removal, counter spells, draw spells, things like that. So you can probably get the proliferate up to 4 pretty easily. And being able to just cast spells without paying their mana cost just by discarding them, kind of like Madness style, I find that very interesting. I would love to be able to run this in blue-black and then just like discard a Breach the Multiverse and cast it for free while drawing a card off of Malcolm. I think that is a really cool prospect. You play this in, so like you played in Explorer, then you get even more great spells to play this off of. Because you can play this with Invoke Despair, or you could play it with like any of the other like really good removals, counter spells, draw effects, things like that. It's like the kind of like the sky becomes the limit when it comes to drawing, discarding, and just playing free spells at that point. So like I'm just really excited to play around with this card. I think it could be a sleeper. Honestly, even if you don't get to get that effect off, 2/1 flash flying for 2, like it's not that bad. I mean, I've definitely paid 2 mana for worse cards. So pretty excited to play with this one. So hopefully you are too. Okay, our next pick is a card that I'm sure I'm not the only one is going to be wanting to play this card, and this is Oher Pakpatik, the Deepest Epoch. It is the blue god from the cycle of gods in this set, and it's for 2 and 2 blue. It is a legendary creature god, 4/3 flying. Whenever you cast an instant spell from your hand, it gains rebound. So if you're a newer player and you don't know what rebound is, it's an older mechanic that basically says when you cast a spell, you exile that spell, and then you cast it again next turn from exile without paying its mana cost. So like it's really, really strong effect to be able to attach to any spell, because in the older sets, rebound would just be attached to like spells with like very basic abilities, like bouncing a spell or drawing a card or something like that. It was a typically blue mechanic as well. But it's like, say for example, putting rebound on like a kill spell, or putting rebound on a draw 3 spell, or putting rebound on bounce effects, anything like that. Like, or even putting rebound on like really powerful spells, like say Breach the Multiverse, or like a board wipe. Like it's absolutely bonkers, like the potential that you have with rebound being attached to any spell. Really, really strong. So don't sleep on that. But moving on, he says, when Oher Pakpatik dies, return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed under its owner's control with 3 time counters on it. So if this dies, it becomes a land that taps for blue. And it says 2 a blue, tap, transform Temple of Cyclical Time. So when you transform it, it basically just comes back as Oher Pakpatik again. So boom, you got your god back. Activate only if it has no time counters on it and only as a sorcery. And these time counters will be taken off each time you tap it for blue. So after 3 taps of using mana off of it, then boom, you can get your Oher Pakpatik back. So really, really strong card. This card will absolutely shine in like Azorius Control, or maybe even Bant. I can see Bant working really well with this card when you want to rebound like ramp effects or combat tricks or any of like the really cool things in green that you might want to get bonus effect off of. Let's say, for example, what is it? Storm the Festival would be a fantastic card to get rebound off of. Let's see, they're in green and white. I can't remember the name of the spell, but it was 1 colorless, 1 green, 1 white, and you return a permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield if it has like mana cost 3 or less. Otherwise, it goes to your hand. I forget the name of it, but it's one of the more recent spells. A spell like that with rebound would be fantastic. But yeah, again, like a lot of really great potential giving rebound to anything. I'm really excited to play with this card. It's probably going to be one of the cards I mess around with first. So you'll probably see a deck including O'Hare Batik very soon. So look out for that. Okay, next up in our list of things that I'm really excited to play with, we have Bloodletter of Ixalan. Bloodletter is a fantastic card. And here's what it does. So like for 1 and 3 black, you get a 2/4 flying vampire demon. So first off, like you have the vampire tag. So this is a card that can work very well with a lot of the new vampires that are coming out with Caverns of Ixalan. But its great part is in this text right here in the middle. It says, if an opponent would lose life during your turn, they lose twice that much life instead. Damage causes loss of life. So this little reminder text, in case you don't know, is life loss different than damage, and vice versa. So here's where I really like this card. I like this card with things like what is it? Sheldred. Make your opponent lose 4 life when they draw cards on your turn. Or like cards with menace that make your opponent make very difficult choices in blocking. If say, for example, you have the Shakedown Heavy. It's a big, like 6/4 menace creature that makes your opponent make a very difficult choice. Do I take the damage or do I let them draw cards and untap their heavy? But what I think you can really make great use out of is fling mechanics. There is a vampire in red that came out recently. It came out in Aftermath, and it is a backup creature that gives another creature you control the ability to fling itself to deal damage equal to its power. So let's say you have something that has like a 5 power body, and you give it fling, and you fling at your opponent with the Bloodletter of Ixalan out. Suddenly that 5 becomes a 10, and that right there, it can be a game ender. Other ways to abuse this is just straight up burn. Like if you just straight up burn someone, like say you use a lightning strike, typically does 3 damage. Suddenly this becomes 6 damage. You can use this with aristocrat style effects. Like say like whenever a creature you control dies and it deals 1 damage to the opponent, suddenly that becomes 2 or 4. It's like this card allows such snowbally out of nowhere kills that like I'm really excited to play with this one. I want to build something in probably Jund with this, because I think there's a lot of good self-sacrifice synergies in those colors that can really allow Bloodletter to shine. So I'm excited to play with that, and I hope you are too. Okay, so here we have probably the card I'm the most excited to play with, and if you watched my last video of me opening packs, you saw my reaction to seeing this for the first time, you probably understand why I'm excited for this. This is Bringer of the Last Gift. For 6 colorless and 2 black mana, you get a 6/6 flying vampire demon. And it reads, when Bringer of the Last Gift enters the battlefield, if you cast it, Each player sacrifices all other creatures they control. Then, each player returns all creature cards from their graveyard that weren't put there this way to the battlefield. So, if you're familiar with this effect, this is an effect from a spell called Living Death. It was a card that originally came out in Tempest a long time ago. And I'm really excited for this because Living Death is one of my all-time favorite cards, period. I love Living Death. And how I want to basically build around and kind of abuse this card is I want to play this in Jund specifically, because Jund gives you access to great ways to ramp in green, ways to grant haste in red, and ways to eliminate the graveyard in black. So my plan for this is to ramp up to 8 mana to cast Ring of the Last Gift, while also self-milling myself and eliminating cards from the graveyard with my with other effects, like say Graveyard Trespasser. The new Rat King also removes cards in graveyards. Also, there is the green mana ramp guy that removes cards from the graveyard when it taps for mana. Like, there's a lot of really great effects to control what your opponent has in the graveyard, while also dumping your own stuff into the graveyard with like effects like, say, like Mulch, for example, is a great self-mill and land finder. And then there's also the little fungus dude from, I think it was Midnight Hunt. It was a little 1/1 fungus that puts cards into your graveyard every turn. Also, there is Old Rutstein, does a similar effect and gives you bonuses for whatever card goes into your graveyard. So the plan is to ramp out, fill your graveyard, eliminate your opponent's graveyard, and then casting something like Song of Totentons for a single red mana to give your entire team haste. So when this guy drops and brings the whole team back in, you want to be able to sucker punch your opponent without giving them enough time to react to what you're doing. And a card like Song of Totentons can do that for you, give the entire team haste for only a single red mana. So, like, I'm really excited to play with this one. This one is going to be a lot of fun. So, look forward to that one too. Okay, so I had to do a double and then triple take when reading this card originally, but this card is looking to be really fun. It is kind of like a dirtly card. I don't know how competitive this is going to be, but this card just looks really fun. So this is Brass's Tunnel Grinder. For 2 and a red, you get a legendary artifact, and it says when Brass's Tunnel Grinder enters the battlefield, discard any number of cards and then draw that many cards +1. Okay, so first off, this acts as like a kind of like Wheel of Fortune effect. You just throw all your cards away, get a handful of new cards. Really cool effect. I like that a lot. And honestly, it actually even has the same mana cost as the original Wheel of Fortune. So there you go, that's a bonus. Then it says, at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, put a boar counter on Brass's Tunnel Grinder. Then, if there are 3 or more boar counters on it, remove those counters and transform it. So the great thing about Descend is it triggers when you put a permanent card into your graveyard from anywhere. It means from the top of your library, if you discarded it, if you had something on the battlefield die, it all counts for Descend. So that is fantastic. So basically what that means is, like, when you play Brass's Tunnel Grinder, you discard your hand to draw extra cards. Well, that just triggered Descend right there, didn't it? So you get that first boar counter on the Tunnel Grinder immediately. So you're already like getting the ball rolling with the Tunnel Grinder. So what happens when you get 3 counters on it? Well, you transform it and it becomes Tecluton the Searing Rift. It is a legendary land. It's also a cave that taps for red mana. Whenever you cast a permanent spell using mana produced by Tecluton the Searing Rift, discover X, where X is that spell's mana value. So bear this in mind. This card bores down into the depths below and becomes the Searing Rift. And whenever you cast a spell any spell using mana from this card, and you discover, you cascade for a bunch. So like if you use a removal spell, suddenly that removal spell becomes a cascade effect, allowing you to put something else onto the battlefield. Or if you use like a reanimation effect, let's see, like for example, you cast a 5 mana reanimation spell, then you discover 5 for whatever else could be in your deck, be it another creature, be it a removal spell, be it a draw spell, like, or let's say like you're playing Jund, like suddenly you can cascade into Invasion of Zendikar and get 2 extra lands out of your library. It's such a crazy effect. While it is kind of dirtily, I do really want to build a deck with this. It's like it's not a win the game kind of card. It's just kind of like a fun kind of fool around card. I really want to play with it. And speaking of discovering and throwing cards in the graveyard, we have Trumpeting Carnosaur. For 4 and 2 red, it is a 7/6 dinosaur with trample. And it says, when Trumpeting Carnosaur enters the battlefield, discover 5. So right off the bat, basically just read that as Cascade. Because like you're discovering 5, which is 1 less than its casting cost, so that's pretty cool right there. And it says 2 and a red, discard Trumpeting Carnosaur. It deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. Again, really cool. This card has a lot going on for it. So for only 6 mana, you have a 7/6 trampling Cascade. Like right there, you could just stop with the words and it's already a good card. But then that ability to discard it to deal 3 to a creature or a planeswalker is pretty strong, because you just throw it in the graveyard and then reanimate it with like any reanimation spell. Suddenly you just, 1, dealt with a problematic card on your opponent's side of the board, and then you have something in the graveyard to bring back, and suddenly it's in play, and you put it into play, and now you're cascading for 5. It's like it's really a lot going on with this card, and I think this card goes directly into this deck idea that I have of like a Jund reanimation style deck that is going to include things like the Tunnel Grinder, is going to include things like the Bringer of the Last Gift, like that we talked about earlier. Like there's a lot of just really cool effects stapled onto a lot of these creatures, and I'm really excited to play with them. Okay, our next card is pretty bonkers. This is the Skullspore Nexus. For 6 colorless and 2 green, it's a legendary artifact. And this card reads, this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Whenever 1 or more non-token creatures you control die, create a green fungus dinosaur creature token with base power and toughness, each equal to the total power of those creatures. And then 2, tap, double target creature's power until end of turn. This card is silly. Absolutely bonkers. This is a card that you're going to play in like the mid to late game after you've already got a few creatures on the board. And like I said, let's play it a little conservative here. Let's say you're just slotting this into a deck that already is running like just like really cool cards. Let's say, for example, you're playing this in Golgari midrange. Say on turn 4 you play your Sheldred, because you're most likely going to be playing Sheldred in a Golgari deck. So Sheldred costs 4, which is going to reduce the cost of this by 4 down to 2 colorless and 2 green mana. It's a perfectly reasonable amount of mana to cast for an effect that is going to basically just net you like shadow creatures on the backside of every creature that you have. So like whenever a creature you control dies, it creates a shadow creature with the same power and toughness that it had. So it makes it so your opponent has to run double removal on everything you have. And then, of course, it has this 2 and tap double target creature's power until end of turn. So even if your opponent isn't actively removing your stuff, you can just use this on an unblocked creature, just punch through a ton of damage. This card is really, really silly, and I'm here for it. I absolutely want to play with this card. This card looks freaking crazy, and I'm really excited for it. Okay, and rounding out all the colors is Cosmium Confluence. This card is really interesting, mostly because of its ability to choose all three of its effects and choose one of its effects multiple times. So let's read this real quick. So Cosmic Confluence, it's sorcery. It costs 4 colorless and a green. Very splashable. I like that a lot. And it says choose 3. You may choose the same mode more than once. And its modes are search your library for a cave card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Put 3 +1/+1 counters on a cave you control. It becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with haste, and it's still a land. And destroy target enchantment. So you could destroy 3 enchantments, make a cave into a 9/9, or go get 3 caves out of your library and just put them onto the table. This card is absolutely silly, and just the versatility of a card like this cannot be overstated, especially with the very high reliance on some enchantments that a lot of decks have now. Like even if all you're playing against is like green-white enchantments, having a card that can destroy 3 enchantment creatures is pretty strong. Or if you're playing against a prison deck, and just break 3 of their ossifications or oblivion rings or ley lines, like just break their toys, get your stuff back. Like that's a great use of 5 mana right there. But I think the ability to go and get 3 lands directly out of your library and pop them on the table, that part right there is probably its strongest effect. Being able to ramp at a factor of 3 for only 5 mana is pretty damn strong. So like this is a card that I would definitely splash into probably like a good like 3-color deck, like maybe like Sultai Caves or something along those lines. That's where my mind immediately goes to. So I don't exactly have a home for this just yet, but I got the old brewer's noodle going for this one. So we'll see what happens with this card. For our next pick, we're taking a look at Saheeli the Sun's Brilliance. Now, Saheeli has gotten a lot of different card iterations recently, but I think this is probably one of the better ones. So Saheeli the Sun's Brilliance is a 2/2 for only a blue and red, so really well costed. And her ability is blue-red tap. Create a token that's a copy of another target creature or artifact you control, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So one thing to take into account here is like this is like a variation on the old Kiki Jiki the Mirror Breaker. So that instead of just being able to target creatures, you can also target artifacts. And my brain immediately goes to artifacts like the Might Stone and the Weak Stone because of its comes into play effects. And also goes to something like the Portal to Phyrexia. You just make a copy of the portal and make your opponent sacrifice three creatures on freaking demand. It's like that is such a strong effect. But also it can copy prototype creatures. Maybe make a copy of that prototype creature that you put into play for its prototype cost, and it comes in at its full size. Now I don't know if that actually works like that. I'm hoping it does. But if it makes just a copy of it, it probably would only make it for its prototype side. So don't quote me on that one. But basically any kind of comes into play effect on any creature or on any artifact, you can just instantly just copy it. Does it say at... No, it does not say at sorcery speed. So you can do that at instant speed. Copy a crazy effect that would ruin your opponent's game plan at any time on your turn or your opponent's turn. It's that's a really, really strong effect. I like it a lot. Now, as to where this card is going to fit, that's a good question. You'll probably see this fitting into a Jeskai artifacts kind of build, kind of like the kind of build that wants to play maybe a little bit of ramp, maybe a little bit of protection, planeswalkers, that kind of thing. But me personally, I really want to copy Portal to Phyrexia with this card. If I can copy it just once, then I'll be happy with this card. Like this definitely has me thinking about the possibilities. So I'm really excited for this one. Yeah, and our next pick is Kutsil the Malamet Exemplar. Now, this is a card that I really like just for its disruptive effects. So, for 1 green and a white, you get a 3/3 Cat Warrior, and it says your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. Whenever one or more creatures you control, each with power greater than its base power, deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So, immediately, this wants to go into a deck that runs Anthem effects or maybe +1/+1 counters. Just any kind of effect that like would benefit off of that last line of text. So you can run this in a green-white +1 counters build, which is absolutely doable. There's tons of ways to put +1 counters in both those colors. Anthem effects are also very strong. Probably want to run this with maybe Wedding Announcement, because after the third turn of Wedding Announcement being on the table, it will flip over and become an Anthem effect. In the Trenches also comes to mind as well, just because it has the activated ability of locking up a creature too. But yeah, that effect is really strong, but also probably even stronger is the ability to lock out your opponents on your turn. It's basically making it so counterspell heavy decks have a really tough time against you. So like if you can manage to get this down onto the table underneath mono blues like counter magic, or even playing it with the uncounterable effect of Cavern of Souls, so like this could absolutely just lock out a greedy control deck. So like this card, I think we're going to be seeing quite a bit of in the coming months. So keep your eye on Kutsil Malamet Exemplar. Okay, and for our next pick, we are looking at Kimil the Inner Sun. This is a legendary artifact. It costs 6 colorless mana, and it says, spells you control can't be countered. You may be seeing a theme in this set. They really don't want you playing counter spells in this set at all. Not at all. So it says 6 mana, your spells can't be countered, and at the beginning of your end step, discover 5. This card is crazy. Like absolutely bonkers. Like the 6 mana cost on this spell for this effect, I see no problem with whatsoever. Like you can ramp this out pretty easily with green. Run this as a splash in like pretty much any color deck because it's colorless. But a deck that would probably really be able to capitalize on the Discover effect is probably something like Abzan or something like Jund, or maybe even Grixis would be able to capitalize on this pretty well, because you get a lot of like really great like removal effects out of those colors and draw effects and things like that. The only thing you don't really want to be like discovering into is probably like counter spells, but anything else, like just really, really solid. Like the ability to just discover 5 at the end of every single turn and having your spells not be able to be counters, like such a stupidly powerful card. A card that I don't think is like going to be like crazy competitive, because again, it is 6 mana. It is kind of like a 6 mana almost do nothing immediately, but it's really powerful. It's like one of those investment cards. Like you play it and immediately it doesn't really have too much effect, but it really sets you up for powerful turns in the future. Okay, and so for our next pick, we are looking at the Roaming Throne. So Roaming Throne is an interesting card. For 4 mana, it's a 4/4 artifact creature golem, and it has Ward 2. So already looking pretty good. And it says, as Roaming Throne enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Roaming Throne is the chosen type in addition to its other types. So it's kind of like a changeling in that. And it says, if a triggered ability of another creature you control of the chosen type triggers, it triggers an additional time. So you're thinking of death effect triggers, you're thinking of comes into play triggers, you're thinking of on attack triggers. Like this card can double the effectiveness of any tribe that you're looking to play this with, be that merfolk, vampires, Phyrexians, like anything that you want to have like a great added effect of, as well as having a solid 4/4 beater for 4 mana. It's like this is just a really, really solid card to go into any kind of typal deck. So I think we're probably going to be seeing quite a bit of this card as at least like a 2 of in most typal decks. So look out for this guy. I think he's going to be really cool. Okay, and our last pick for cards that we are excited to play with is Cavern of Souls. And this quite possibly is the most powerful card in the entire set, just because of its ability to make things uncounterable. It reads, as Cavern of Souls... Oh, Baron, also, think about this. This is not a legendary land. So you can have up to 4 of these on the battlefield at any given time. And it says, as Cavern of Souls enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Tap, add a colorless. Tap, add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type. And that spell can't be countered. So, immediately, I'm a big fan of Phyrexians, right? So I want to jam this in any like Phyrexian typal deck that I can think of. But also, vampires are very popular right now. Merfolk just got a big buff. Pirates just got a big buff. Elves is also kind of playable. But like, also consider this in a deck like, say, soldiers or humans. Like, those are 2 tribes that are like really, really strong right now. But me personally, I think I'm going to be jamming this in some multicolored Phyrexian typal deck. It's like I really don't want my Sheldreds getting counterspelled, you know? But yeah, this card right here, it is a reprint, but it is a very, very valuable reprint. So me personally, I think this is probably the best card in the entire set, even though it is a reprint. And I cannot wait to start jamming games with this. So there you go. There you have it. It's going to be a lot of fun. So hope you enjoy this card as much as I'm going to. All right, and there you have it. Those were my picks for cards that I'm most excited to play with. Not necessarily the most powerful cards in the set, or the cards that are going to shake up Standard, but these are my personal choices for cards that I am the most excited to play with. So look forward to decks featuring some, if not all, of these cards coming up soon. So also, I'm interested to know how you feel about these picks, or like what are the picks that you are most excited to play with. Go ahead and leave a comment in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear from you. So until next time, y'all take care of yourselves.